This is Lecture 1 for Biology 177. The topic of this lecture is Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. First off, anatomy is the study of body structures and their physical relationships, whereas physiology is the study of functioning systems. So the major difference between these two is that anatomy is the study of structure and physiology is the study of function. Anatomy can be broken up into gross anatomy and microscopic anatomy. Gross anatomy is large. Gross means large. It's visible to the unaided eye, whereas microscopic anatomy is just like it says. It's microscopic. You need magnification to be able to see this. For gross anatomy, an example of this could be a bone or a muscle, whereas microscopic might be the bone cells or the cells of the muscle itself. In physiology, we look at function overall, and this is going to understand how different systems go through different processes. So this is going to include chemical and physical processes. So an example could be how bone grows, how muscle contracts, how your kidneys are going to filter blood to make urine. All of these things are physiology-based because it's function and how structures work. The physiology is more complex to understand than anatomy. Anatomy can be, in a lot of cases, understanding layout and organization and a little bit of memorization, whereas physiology is going to be looked at more as a flow chart of different events that are going to occur over time. Now, understanding the general properties of anatomy and physiology is really looking at the emergent properties in living systems. What do I mean by this? I mean that all of these individual parts, for example, in a cell, you have the mitochondria, you have the nucleus, you have ribosomes, you have endoplasmic reticulums. All of these parts are going to come together in order to make a structure that will then emerge into life. So the basic understanding of the emergent properties in living systems is that the sum is greater than the parts. And this is, of course, true in the human body, where you actually have the cardiovascular system, your heart and blood vessels. You have the nervous system, which is going to consist of different nerve fibers that run through, as well as helpful cells that help maintain these. These are going to integrate together with all of the other systems of the body to produce you, a human. Understanding the overall principles of emergent properties is the first step into understanding our human body and physiology and anatomy in general. The next, we're going to look at themes in physiology. In this first, we're going to discuss structure and function. Now, structure and function in the human body are very closely related. What do I mean by this? Something is going to look like what it does. Form follows function. A muscle can only perform what a muscle performs because of its overall structure. It looks like something that is going to slide past each other in order to contract, and therefore it does this. This is never perfect, and there's oftentimes waste or an inefficient manner in which the body does this, but it's trying to get as close as possible to achieving the function with the given structure that it has. So we're going to see this later on as we look at each of the body systems. Just something to kind of keep in the back of your head as we move forward. The next theme in physiology is with respect to homeostasis. Homeostasis maintains internal stability, and it is maintained through different feedback systems. I'm going to go through that in the next slide set. The final themes in physiology are going to be covered in Lecture 3 and beyond. And this is that life is based on cells. Cell is going to be the smallest overall organism that is alive. And our body is going to be made up of millions and billions of cells. And we're going to see this as we move through. Finally, the last principle and theme that we talk about in physiology is going to be that living organisms need energy in order to function. For this, we're going to be looking at bioenergetics in Lecture 3 and understanding how our body takes sugar and turns it into usable energy in our body. The first theme in physiology we'll discuss in greater depth is going to be homeostasis. Homeostasis is the presence of a normal internal environment despite changes in the external environment. Now, this does not mean that it is a constant internal environment. It is dynamic, so it is ever changing. In some cases, our system might need to run hotter. In some cases, it might need to run colder. We typically function within a range of acceptable homeostatic variables. We'll get into this in a little bit greater depth. But do remember that it is not constant, it is dynamic. Now, there are a number of physiological mechanisms that exist to maintain homeostasis across multiple systems. We're going to cover a lot of these as we go through each of the systems independently. Failure to maintain homeostasis, balance in the body, leads to illness or death, and we look at this as different pathologies. And oftentimes, how we see how homeostatic mechanisms work is when they break. When we look at homeostasis, we're looking at first a general concept called mass balance in an open system. Here we can actually see that we have a current body load in the center. We have an input and we have an output. Input is going to be any sort of intake of, for example, in this case, fluid through the intestine, lungs, and skin. We also get some through metabolic production. This is going to go into our current body load. We have an output that is going to be created from excretion or metabolism of new substance. So bringing things in to our current load and pushing things out. Anytime we need to in our body, we need to balance this overall system. And we do this from our existing body load plus our intake minus our excretion. And this equals our overall mass balance of the system. So this can explain how we can maintain certain fluid levels, a certain body weight, or certain chemical compositions in our body of different amino acids, carbohydrates, etc. Now, when looking at homeostatic control, it is not a precise overall mechanism. It typically functions around a range or a set point. Now, the actual value is going to oscillate throughout this. So the set point can change based upon different physiological concerns or pathological concerns. The best example we have of this that people can understand that is outside of the body is going to be an air conditioner. Now, how air conditioners typically work is you decide what temperature you want it at. Here in the example, we use 22 degrees Celsius as our set point. Now, the air conditioner doesn't just turn on or turn off with respect to only 22. It usually uses a range of a few degrees above and a few degrees below. And this is done so that it doesn't have to constantly turn on. So what it does is we set it at 22 degrees Celsius, and as the room gets a little bit warmer, it might get up to 25, 26 degrees, and then it's going to click on. The air conditioner will then turn on and cool the room down. It's actually going to be bringing the room down to well below 22 degrees. In this case, maybe it'll bring it down to 18 or 19 degrees Celsius. And then it will shut off. From there, it's going to gradually warm up again, but it's saved itself a little bit of energy by cooling it all the way down. So it's trying to stay around the general set point of 22 and turns on or off based upon how high it gets, how high or how low it gets above those things. Now let's talk a little bit about the general process and the overall parts of a homeostatic mechanism. The components of a homeostatic mechanism involve a receptor, an integrating center, and an effector. The receptor determines input. It's a sensor, so it's going to be something that monitors the environment. In the case of an air conditioner, it's going to be the thermometer. This thermometer is going to respond to changes in the environment, temperature with respect to the thermometer, but these changes are called stimuli. Any kind of stimuli that comes in is information that is going to be going through that sensory system and will eventually go to the second portion, the control center or integrating center. The integrating center is a processing center. It's going to analyze that input or stimuli it receives to determine the appropriate response. Think of it as the brain of the overall system. The final component is the effector or output. Now, effector, think of exit, output. Anytime we're effecting something, it's going to be the output of this system. It's going to respond to the commands of the control center and provide the means for response. In this case, it might be the overall air conditioner unit itself activating to be able to cool the system. Let's look at a visual representation of these different components of the homeostatic mechanism. Here we actually have our homeostatic mechanism. We'll start at the top circle that says homeostasis. Here we have normal room temperature. Next, our normal room temperature condition is disturbed. The stimulus for this is the room temperature will rise. It's getting warmer in the room. So we then activate the receptor. The receptor, in this case, the input, is going to be the thermometer. The thermometer now senses that it's too warm. This information is going to go to the thermostat or control center of the actual mechanism. The thermostat is checking, it's set at 22 degrees Celsius and it is too far above this general set point. That means the control center will then send the command to the effector to turn the air conditioner on. The air conditioner will then turn on, cooling the room. As the room temperature drops, it will go back into the homeostatic mechanism and provide that overall system response to return the system to normal and shut the thermostat and air conditioner off. Now, there are a few different mechanisms for controlling homeostasis and regulating it in the body, and these involve feedback mechanisms. Feedback mechanisms, here the stimulation of a receptor triggers the response that changes the environment at that receptor. Now, there are three different methods with how these feedback mechanisms work to maintain homeostasis. The first and most common is negative feedback. Negative feedback, in this case, the effector opposes or negates the original stimulus. That's a very key concept to understand. Opposes or negates. It means that it's going to go the opposite direction based upon what the stimulus is. An example of this in the human body is if you start to get hotter overall, your body then tries to cool you down. So it's as your body gets hotter, it's trying to oppose that and cool your body down. Conversely, if your body's getting too cold, you're going to do things to heat your body up to return you back to that homeostasis that you have. So again, remember, negative feedback. Negative opposes or negates the original stimulus. This is done to minimize change, and it is the primary mechanism of homeostatic regulation in the body. It is a dynamic process. We've said this before. It is never constant. It is dynamic. The set point can vary with varying environments and activity levels. So there's a lot of different things that can change where that set point is. And you'll see different examples as we move through in a lot of these lectures. Let's give you a visual representation of negative feedback. Here we can see negative feedback in its overall loop structure and give you two different examples on how it can be too high or too low. Starting in the center, we have our normal body temperature. As we work our way up, my body temperature increases. Here, the brain detects the change and causes increased sweating, dilation of skin blood vessels, all the things that you need to cool your body down. So it's the sweating and increased blood flow causes heat loss. Thereby, the body temperature will return to normal. Let's go the other direction. Now we're going to make you cold. Your body temperature decreases, and the brain detects a change and causes decreased sweating, constriction of blood vessels, and your body starts shivering. So all of these things are going to be involved in trying to actually produce heat in the body and retain our overall heat that our body produces naturally. This is going to cause our body temperature to warm up and return towards normal. So you can see in both cases, we are negating or opposing the original stimulus in order to return to homeostasis. Now, there are two other mechanisms of feedback loops. The next is positive feedback. Positive feedback is going to exaggerate the original stimulus rather than opposing it. So it is in contrast to negative feedback. Positive feedback exaggerates that original stimulus. This tends to produce an extreme response, and it does not restore homeostasis. This is only really seen at two places in the body. The first is going to be with, as you can see in the diagram below, pregnancy. Pregnancy is going to involve a positive feedback loop that is going to cause an overall increased stretch and contraction of the uterine muscles in order to give birth. I'll take you through the diagram now. The stimulus response is as the baby moves deeper into the mother's birth canal, it's going to stretch the cervix of the uterus. This is going to cause nerve impulses that are sent up into the brain, the hypothalamus, to actually release a hormone called oxytocin. This hormone is going to then be released into the bloodstream and act upon the uterine muscles to start contracting. So the initial feedback loop was that the cervix was stretched and started to contract. The actual feedback mechanism is going to enhance those contractions of the uterus. This is entirely designed to give birth. Another example of positive feedback that's cited in your lecture notes as well is going to be called hemostasis. It's going to be the blood clotting. Anytime you get cut, your body is going to exaggerate the clotting mechanisms in order to stop bleeding. So the main thing to learn from positive feedback is that it exaggerates the original stimulus or enhances it in order to achieve a specific goal. Examples of positive feedback are going to be increasing contractions during birth and healing a wound or cut. The final feedback mechanism is called the feed-forward mechanism. Now, this is different from other feedback mechanisms in that nothing has really changed, but it is anticipatory in nature. So this is the negative feedback loop, but nothing has actually changed yet. It anticipates the change in the physiological set point and initiates a response to reduce deviations. So it's preparing for what it perceives to come based upon stimulus. Two examples we have here are going to be the smell or sight of food that initiates digestive activity. You can think about this. You come home, you've had a long day, you open the door and you smell a delicious dinner being cooked. You are immediately way hungrier than when you came in, and you start to salivate and think about the meal that's to come, and you're ready to go. Another example is going to be a cold temperature that initiates a response before your body temperature is even dropped. So maybe you step outside after being very warm and you feel this brisk cold wind that just brushes against your face, and you start to shiver and feel cold. Now, your body temperature hasn't dropped in such a short time period, but your body is preparing for the cold that is to come and starts to adapt. So these are the feed-forward mechanisms. It is a negative feedback loop that is anticipatory or predictive in nature. Now that we've finished with homeostasis for now, I want you to look at a broader overall concept and a contrast between teleology and mechanistic explanation. First, teleology is simply the overall study of why things do what they do, whereas mechanistic is about how. A process or mechanism describes the how something happens. Let's give you an example here. Why do red blood cells carry oxygen? Teleology, the why, would tell you, well, because cells need oxygen and red blood cells bring it to them. Well, yes, that's true. But the mechanistic explanation of why do red blood cells carry oxygen is that oxygen binds to hemoglobin molecules contained in the red blood cells. Now, oftentimes I will say, why does something do what it does? When I'm saying why, I'm saying how a lot of this time. So try to remember that mechanistic explanation of how something does something, and you will be a lot better off. Now we're going to look at the levels of organization, and from there lay out the different systems of the body. We start off at the very bottom, to the far left of this diagram, in chemistry. Chemistry looks at atoms and then molecules. Atoms are going to be the components of the universe based on protons, electrons, and neutrons. And they combine together to create different molecules of things. Molecules will combine together to create cells. Cells are going to be the smallest overall life form that we deal with. And this is going to be what molecular biology focuses on, which is cells. Now, as multiple cells combine together, we get what is called tissues. Now, there are 4 types of tissues in the human body. There are connective tissues, epithelial, muscle, and nervous tissue. Connective tissues are going to do exactly what they say they do. They connect things together. This is going to be the different ligaments, dense irregular connective tissue, a lot of the tissue that makes up your integumentary system, your skin. It's going to be the bone in your body that will be composed of connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is going to be tissue that deals with the different linings of the body, your mucosal linings, the linings of your digestive tract, the linings of the very outer portion of your skin. They protect the different cavities and openings in your body and give you an extra barrier there. They're easily flaked off and easily rebuilt. With regards to epithelial tissue, it also is going to make up a large majority of your hormonal function and secretions. Muscle tissue should be fairly obvious what it does. It's going to be involved in your muscular contractions. All the muscles of your body are composed of muscle tissue. The final one, nervous tissue, is going to be involved in communication and sending signals. It is going to be what your brain and nerves are made up of. Now, all of these tissues will combine together to create organs. An organ is any structure made of two or more tissues. Examples of this are brain, heart, lungs, liver, but also muscles, things like the biceps brachii, an eye, and a femur bone. Bones are organs too. Remember that. Organs combine together to create organ systems. And the organ systems are going to then combine together to make an organism, what you are. And those organisms are going to then combine together to create populations of a species. For example, humans. Those humans will then work together with other different species in an ecosystem of different species, which will thereby combine together to create eventually a biosphere, which is going to be our overall planet. Now, in this class, we're not going to go so far as to focus on our overall population. We're going to primarily be looking at cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems. Here, we can actually see a nice layout of a primary focus of the anatomy and physiology class. Here we have our organism, the human, the organs, and the different organ systems as they are all laid out. Let's go through each one of the organ systems. The first organ system is the integumentary system. This is going to be your skin and the overall linings of your body. It protects against environmental hazards and helps to control body temperature. It consists of your epidermis or skin. It's going to consist of your nails, your hair, and a lot of the different linings of our inner body. Next is skeletal system. The skeletal system provides support, protects tissues, stores minerals, and forms blood cells. It is going to be composed of the axial and appendicular skeletal system that exists throughout the body. Our muscular system is designed to provide movement, support, and generate heat. Anecdotally, it's also the highest amount of protein we have in our body is stored in our skeletal muscle. Our nervous system is going to direct immediate response to stimuli, usually by coordinating the activities of other organ systems. This is going to be the conductor of our body, primarily with the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. It will send these signals out to the peripheral nervous system, which are going to be the nerves that connect out through our arms, legs, into our digestive tract and body. And it's going to be the overall communication tool that helps to regulate all of the other systems together. The endocrine system is going to work in conjunction with the nervous system and directs long-term changes in other systems. You can also think of the endocrine system as our hormonal system. It's going to be a bunch of different glands that deal with hormonal function in the body. The cardiovascular system is going to be a transportation system. It transports cells and dissolved materials, including nutrients, wastes, and gases. So this is how we actually transport anything we need to in the body. It's going to consist of our blood vessels as well as a pump, the heart, to be able to send everything out to the entire body. Our lymphatic system is going to be working in conjunction with the cardiovascular system, and it is a series of vessels that is designed to return fluid into the bloodstream and also acts as our immune system defending us against infection and disease. Our respiratory system is going to also work in conjunction with our cardiovascular system, and it delivers air to sites where gas exchange can occur between the air and the circulating blood. It also produces sound. This is how we also eliminate CO2 from our body, getting oxygen into it. Our digestive system is going to be how we process food and absorb nutrients. It is otherwise known as the alimentary canal, and it's going to go from our oral cavity all the way down to the rectum and anus, and consists of also several accessory organs that will help to process different food items that move through. The urinary system seems small and almost trivial, but it's actually very important in eliminating excess water and regulating the body fluid and pH levels of our body, as well as salts and eliminating waste. It is a filtration system for our blood, and it runs through the kidneys, and the kidneys are going to produce urine that is then stored in the urinary bladder and excreted through the urethra. The final systems that we'll be looking at are the reproductive systems. The female reproductive system produces sex cells and hormones, supports embryonic development from fertilization to birth. It's also going to nourish the overall child with the mammary glands producing milk. The male reproductive system is involved in the production of sex cells, sperm or spermatocytes, as well as hormones that are going to help the development of the spermatocyte. And that is going to conclude Lecture 1.